Hello, I'm Kerry from Living in Loveliness, and during our tutorial today I'm going to show you how to make this super fast and very easy accessory roll. This is one of the projects that feature in issue 2, So Useful, from the Fabulously Fast Fat Quarter Fund sewing series. Since launching this pattern series, we have then gone on to break down each pattern into an individual pattern. For this sew along, you're going to need a copy of the pattern and the template. You'll also need 2 beautiful coordinating fat quarters and a metre of ribbon. Once you've cut your templates from the fat quarters, you will have some fabric left over to add to your stash to make a project at a later stage. The other collections that I'm going to use during the tutorial today is some 505 spray. Now this is an optional collection to use in the project. You could pin the fabric, but I personally prefer to add this to secure the fabrics directly to the batten. You're also going to need a fabric pen marker, whether you're using a chalk or a heat erasable pen. You'll need some clips or some pins, whichever you prefer to work with. The last 2 things that you're going to need are a needle and thread to sew the turning gap when you've put the project together, and a small pair of scissors to trim away any excess threads that you're collecting as you're making your project. This is a machine-friendly project. You could hand sew this, but it would take much longer. So I'm using an ironing board, an iron, and a sewing machine today. I've chosen to work with pink to complement the threads in the fabric here, but you could work with a bold cotton from your collection to really make the decorative stitches on this project pop at a later stage. This is really fast and easy to make. It's very versatile, so you can use this for your makeup brushes. You can use this for your accessories, your sewing accessories. I particularly like using this. I like sewing on the go. So this is a great one to pop into my handbag, and it allows me to sew while I'm traveling in the car. As I said, you could use this for makeup brushes, and you can use this as well as a pencil roll for your crochet hooks. It's entirely up to yourself. As we work through the tutorial today, I will show you how to measure up those pockets so it is useful for whatever you're designing your accessory roll for. So to start with, what you're going to need is your exterior fabric, so your favourite fabric from your 2 fabrics that you've chosen. Mine is this beautiful mint green floral fabric, and then you're going to need your batting as well. So the template is incredibly simple. Now the step-by-steps will recommend writing the letters onto your pieces of fabric, but it's very easy. There's only 3 pieces of fabric to work with. Just keep your template to hand, especially if you're a beginner, as I do refer to each piece of fabric as the letter that you can see showcased on the template. Now I would also recommend working with a non-directional pattern, because when you come to put this project together, you'll notice that we do fold this in both directions, so I would recommend working with a non-directional fabric. So the first thing that we're going to do is place your batting directly onto the table. I would recommend not using that onto your ironing board, as sometimes you can get a little bit of spray onto your work surface. So even just using the template and the background there, just to make sure that none of your spray is going onto your work surface, onto your sewing machine, or even onto your pressing mat. So I'm just going to spray just a tiny amount of the 505. Any adhesive spray will work, and as I mentioned, you can skip this step if you want to. The next thing that we're going to do is place that fabric on top, and just run your hand over to make sure that there are no creases in your fabric. If you are finding that once you've popped your fabric on top and there is any excess batting, take a moment at this stage to trim that away. I have got a tiny little bit just this side, so I'm just going to trim that away. You will find that this makes it much easier when you come to sew your seams in just a moment. So as you can see, it really only is a tiny little bit of batting, but it's worth taking that extra moment or 2 to do that. The next thing that we're going to do is to place this flat onto the table with a pattern facing up towards us, and then taking the lining fabric. So this is the fabric we're going to see feature on the interior part of the accessory roll. I'm going to place this on top pattern facing, aligning those raw edges at both the top and the bottom. And using either your clips or pins, again, whichever you prefer to work with, we're just going to pop a few along that raw edge, and again on the opposite side. So just a few clips just to hold those fabrics together. Now we're going to sew along both of those raw edges. So those little clips remind me where I'm sewing. Set the sewing machine up. Make sure at this stage you've got a nice topped up bobbin. We are going to be doing a lot of sewing for this particular project and some nice decorative stitches as well. So you'll want to ensure that you've got a lovely topped up bobbin to begin with. So starting and finishing on each of these rows with a reverse stitch, we're simply sewing along that top edge. I'm going to increase the stitch to 3.5 on my machine. And once we arrive at that raw edge on that corner, we're going to finish there with a reverse stitch. Take that from the machine and remove any excess fabric, any excess thread, and then we're simply going to start on the opposite side, again with a reverse stitch, sewing along that raw edge. We are using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again finishing with a reverse stitch, just taking away that excess fabric. Now I have noticed again I've got just a little bit of excess batting there, so I'm just going to trim that out of the way. Just popping those clips to one side for now. And the next thing that we're going to do is to just pull this through and turn this right side out. We do a lot of pulling it in and out at this stage. So the next thing that we're going to do here is to just bring this onto the ironing board and just give those edges just a little press, just to secure those into place. So just running your iron across the top and the bottom to secure those into place. The next thing that we're going to do, using your ruler, I have got a mat here that's got measurements on, so I'm going to use the measurements on my mat. We're simply folding this bottom edge in, and this is where using the fabric that isn't a decorative stitch is very helpful. We're folding this up, so this is folded up 4 inches now. So the mat is really helping me, or you could use your ruler at this stage just to double check all the way along. This is 4 inches, so there's no twists and turns on there. Once I'm happy that that's at 4 inches, again I'm just going to give that a little press, just to give that a score line, and then on the top part of the project I'll just give that another press to secure this into position. Now, because I'm using the clips, I'm just going to pop these onto the end to secure this into place, to hold that together. Taking the ribbon, this is 1 metre long. If you're going to put lots of things into here, you may even want to cut your ribbon at 1.5 metres. So I'm folding this in half, aligning those raw edges there, and I'm simply just going to place this on top of the fabric, just in line here with the top of that pocket. Again, I'm going to just clip this into position because we're going to sew this in place now. Now, because we turn this inside out in just a moment, I'm going to top stitch along this pocket. So just placing this onto the machine, popping this in line with the side of the sewing machine foot here. Now this is your opportunity to use those beautiful threads, lovely decorative stitches, and we're simply going to sew along this folded edge here. So I'm going to select the zigzag stitch on my machine. You could use any of those decorative stitches, or of course you could use your straight stitch at this point. Just allowing that project to sew along that top folded pocket. To create that beautiful decorative top stitch. There's no need to reverse when you're doing your top stitch, so we'll leave that just there. And then the next thing that we want to do is to just secure this ribbon into place. So just sliding this onto the machine. There's no need to take the machine side off for this step. We're just going to pop this onto the machine, return the stitch back to a straight stitch, and just sew across the ribbon just to secure that ribbon into place. This really does just prevent this from falling or any movement in this as we're pulling this project through in just a moment. So we don't want this ribbon to get sewn into the seam, so all I'm going to do is to slide this here into the middle. And as we pull this project through now, so we're bringing this through to the other side and turning this inside out once more. Now, we've got those clips on the inside, so at this stage I'm just going to remove those clips. Make sure that ribbon's tucked into the inside and just press this flat. We've created that score line so we know where that's going to sit because we've already gone ahead and sewn in that little score line just there. So just making sure that this is all nice and flat. Sliding the clips onto the side at this stage and again on the opposite side. Making sure there's no fold. We have a slight fold here, so I'm just going to push that flat. There we go. Now taking your fabric pen, let me just find that fabric pen, there we go. We're going to mark a turning gap. Now you can mark this turning gap on either side as long as it's on the top part. We're going to ignore this part here where we've got that fold and we're going to leave a 3-inch turning gap. You can use your ruler or your mat, whichever measurement you prefer to work with. Come at least 1.5 inches down from the top and just using a fabric pen, just mark your little turning gap here. Place this back onto the machine and we're going to sew along that raw edge, starting and finishing with a reverse stitch. So we're starting on the side where we've got that pen mark. So I'm sewing all the way. We'll just increase that stitch just a little bit. So I've increased my stitch to 3. I'm going to sew to that first pen mark. When I arrive at the pen mark, I'm going to finish with a reverse stitch. Raise this presser foot, tease the thread out a little until I arrive at the second pen mark. Take that clip away and again starting with a reverse stitch and finishing with a reverse stitch. Take this from the machine and remove any excess threads. And on the opposite side, it's a little easier because we haven't got any turning gap to think about. This is the side that has your ribbon. So we will be sewing through that ribbon for a second time to secure that into place too. When you arrive at the bottom folded edge, just finish there with a reverse stitch and remove the project from the sewing machine. Now, because you're working with a batting, you may find that there is a slight amount of bulk onto there, so take a moment to trim away the corners. So I'm just trimming these at a 45-degree angle. It's really only a tiny little bit of fabric to take away there, but it does allow us to achieve a nice point in that corner as well. Be careful not to trim too close to the stitches because you don't want any holes in this project. We'd left that little joining thread here on the side, so take a moment to trim away those threads. And slide in your hand, so we're going to slide 2 fingers through the project to the furthest point. Pinching onto the corner, we're simply going to push this through. And sliding all the inside batting through that little hole. Now you can use either the edge of your scissors, or I'm just using a finger press here. Just going to pop that into the corner nice and gently to get a nice point on each corner there. So just push this on the inside, slide that little tool back inside there, take a moment to trim to push out the corners. We've already trimmed. There we go. Now what's really lovely about this project, as you can see here, is you can have this project, although we've chosen our interior and exterior at this stage, you can change your mind. Or we can go back to what we originally chose and just push that through. So we've got that lovely floral fabric featuring on the exterior part of the project. You've now got that ribbon secured into place, and you've got that top ready to sew together in just a moment. But first of all, we do just want to sew this turning gap. Now I always find just simply by running the iron across this just for a moment or two, you will achieve a nice finish on this turning gap. So just pushing that inside naturally as we pull against that seam, you will find that they rest nicely together. And as you run your iron across here, both on the back and on the front, you'll get a lovely finish to that side. Now you could absolutely top stitch this on the machine, but I do find that you get a lovely finish simply by taking a moment or two to slip stitch that gap closed. If you're making this to gift, it's always nice to have that lovely professional finish on your project too. So just a moment or two to sew that turning gap, keeping those pushed together, sliding that thread just on the inside of those seams, and there we're sliding that thread to create that lovely neat slip stitch on the corner. Trim away that excess thread. Now at this stage, dependent upon what you're going to pop into the project, so if you're going to pop small projects, for example like your little clover chalk pens, you may want the overhang to come in line, excuse me, with the top seam that you've just created. In that case, we would simply then just press this here into position again to score that top line. For myself, I'm making this for my daughter to keep her pencil crayons, her art, her watercolours, and a pen. So just using a pen, I can see there that I need a little less of a fold over at the top. Now the measurements will tell you in the step-by-step instructions to press this over by 2 inches, but of course, as I just mentioned, you can change this to suit your project. So before we go any further, once more we're going to top stitch that folded edge. We have already pressed this, so just resting this back onto the machine, and again setting that machine up to your chosen decorative stitch. You could use a different decorative stitch at this point, or of course you can use that same decorative stitch. Once more I'm going to use the zigzag stitch. Just lining that folded edge up with the side of the sewing machine foot, and allowing the machine to work its magic. And once we arrive at the end, just take a moment to remove those extra threads there. I'll do that bit with scissors. And placing this back onto the ironing board, and I'm going to follow the pattern as it mentions and fold this over 2 inches. So either using your ruler and just resting this on top, just again to make sure that there's no wobbly lines there, or just to get those measurements exact. Or you could use the mat if you have one of these mats that are just resting there on the table. Run your iron across the top again to create that nice score line. This makes it a lot easier to sew this in just a moment. And just make sure there are no folds or pleats on the inside. And once more, just taking those clips, we're just going to secure this into place. Now this time I am going to use a straight stitch. So I'm returning the machine back to the straight stitch, increasing that stitch length to the longest stitch that it will do. Mine is 5 on this machine, and I'm going to start with a reverse stitch, again resting the machine foot on that top folded edge. That just gives me a nice guideline sewing along the full length of that flap. Taking away those extra threads. And the last thing to do to finish this project now is to decide how far you would like those pockets in this particular project. Now, the easiest thing to do is to take a couple of those items. So if I take I've got a few pencils. Let me just get some out of here. There we go, just a few pens, and just lining those up really just to gauge how far I need to mark the distance for the pencils that we're going to slide into here. Now in this particular one here that I've used for my sewing accessories, I've thought about all the things that I like to have in my on-the-go sewing project roll. And so I've got some fabric covered buttons, a small pair of scissors, a glue pen, I've got a little press and roll and a couple of little accessories here. So I left the distance in this particular accessory roll slightly wider than the one that I'm making. The accessory roll I made for the makeup brushes, again I just placed those out in front of me and gauged the distance between each of those so I could separate each brush into a pocket. So for the pencil roll, I'm simply going to place the ruler on top of the fabric. Now, dependent upon which fabric you're working with, if you're working with a darker fabric, you may find that one of the chalk pens makes it easier to mark up your fabric, or if you're working with a light fabric like I'm doing today, you may find that a heat erasable pen works really well for this. Because the pencils that I'm going to put in this one, I'm going to mark these lines up an inch apart. So just pressing this, using that fabric pen, let's try that one more time, and just sliding the ruler across. And we'll pop a few ones in there that are an inch apart as well. It's always worth thinking about what you want to pop in here. If you were making this for a crochet hook roll, then you may even want to make the distance of these lines even slimmer, maybe 3/4 of an inch. In fact, let's have a quick look. Yeah, so I think 3/4 of an inch apart would be great for your crochet hooks as well. So we'll pop a few of those in there as well. Now we've got those held into position there. Now at this point, it's definitely worth just sliding a few pins, especially because you've got 4 layers of fabric and you've got 2 layers of your batting as well, so that will be nice and thick to work with. You could use a walking foot if you wanted to. I'm not going to use a walking foot for this particular project, but you may find that's really helpful on your machine. And I'm simply just going to slide 2 pins through those fabrics just to hold those in place, and I will remove those as I'm sewing in just a moment as well. So resting this onto the machine. Always when you've got batting in a project, start from the centre of your project, and I'm going to start at the bottom. So on both the bottom and the top folded edge we will have a reverse stitch. This will allow us to slide things into the project without the fear of those stitches coming apart. So when I arrive at the top, I'm simply going to finish with a reverse stitch. Raise the presser foot, turn the panel around, slide a little thread and jump across to the next line there. I'm just going to take a moment to trim away that excess thread so it doesn't get tangled up. So again, starting with a reverse stitch, sewing along to the folded edge of the bottom and finishing with a reverse stitch. Each time just pivoting that fabric, leaving a little excess thread. I'm going to remove that pin now because I don't want to sew across that. And by using this technique to jump across to that next line, it means that we're not wasting any, or we're wasting a little bit of thread, but far less than if we took this off the machine each time. So again, finishing with a reverse stitch onto that oh no, we've got 2 more lines on this section. pivoting for the last time on this side and starting and finishing with that reverse stitch. Now when I arrive at that end there, I'm going to trim away that excess thread and come across to the opposite side of the accessory roll. Again, removing that pin and starting and finishing each time with a reverse stitch. You may find that just rolling this over at this stage will make it a little easier. And you can see just how quickly this project comes together. This makes for a very, very fast back to school pencil case as well. Just always make sure that this ribbon is out of the way. We don't want to tuck that underneath and sew that into the back of the project. I've got 2 more rows to finish on here. Again, just rolling this under for that very last pocket. And finishing with that reverse stitch. So to finish this project, all we need to do is take a moment to trim away those joining threads. So each time we jumped across the pocket, we left a little bit of joining thread. So we'll just take those out. And you can see that this is a great way to limit the amount of waste on those gorgeous threads as well. So just turning this over, you will have a few there on the back. So once all of those threads have been trimmed away, you've now got yourself a very useful, very simple and fast accessory roll. This is ready now to insert all of those lovely pens or pencils, accessories. Where did we put the little crochet hook, or even a small pair of scissors? To keep this nice and tidy, we're simply going to bring the flap over the top, roll this together, and take the ribbon, wrap it around either side, bring this into the centre and finish that there with a little bow. I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. If you'd like to find out more about the Fabulously Fast Fat Quarter Fun sewing series, or how to get your hands on a copy of this pattern, do visit the website www.livinginloveliness.com, and on the blog there you'll see full details about all 3 patterns that feature in the sewing series from issue 2, So Useful. I look forward to sewing with you again soon. Bye for now.